Hey everyone, so I am here with a candidate for Senate for the state of Utah. I have Misty Snow here. She is a Berniecrat who is progressive, and she's one of the few who have actually been successful in winning her Democratic primary. So, Misty Snow, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me, Mike.
So, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and why you decided to run for Congress?
So I'm a lifelong resident of Utah. I actually, I'm not like never ran for office before. I actually work at a grocery store, so I'm more of a working class person. What made me decide to run for Congress is I was wanted to see somebody, challenge the Republicans, and the other candidate who's running for the Democratic nomination. He was not a candidate who was going to raise issues that I care about. In his own words, he was a conservative. He was pro-life. He was against Planned Parenthood. He wrote an op-ed about it, and I didn't think it was just unacceptable, but offensive. And his conservative views didn't stop with women's reproductive rights. It was his view on same-sex marriage, that it should be a religious sacrament. He was pro-war. He was in favor of private prisons. And, so on issue after issue, I was really disappointed and didn't want him to, get the Democratic nomination uncontested. So I filed the paperwork to run against him, and I was able to challenge for the nomination. But what helped me with my calculations was that Bernie Sanders won this big win in New Hampshire by like 22% margin. And I knew, looking at Utah's demographics and understanding that Bernie Sanders would probably win really big in Utah, and that a lot of the delegates of state convention would also be elected out of those same caucuses. I knew that there'd probably be a really progressive Bernie Sanders type delegation at the state convention, and that this guy could be really challenged from the left.
Explain kind of how you did this, because I mean, you're a grocery store worker. You explained how you filed the proper paperwork and whatnot. But I mean, if someone else in the country is dissatisfied and they want to run for Congress, I mean, where do you even begin? How did you start?
So, I mean, I just kind of did a bit of research. It was like February filing. The filing week in Utah is March 11th through March 17th. So it was like middle of February. So it's kind of like decision time. And right after New Hampshire, I'm like, I think I'm going to do it. A lot of people, like, it's just like my mom tried to talk about. A lot of people like, this is kind of a crazy idea, but my gut's like, no, I just need to do it. I have this gut feeling I'm going to do it. It's going to work out. It's going to be worth it. So I filed paperwork and filed for U.S. Senate. And I mean, at least in Utah, was $1,355, which is a lot of money for someone like me. And, my federal tax return this year, I happen to be about like $1,357. So I took that and my state tax return to create a campaign account, and most of that money went to cover the filing fee. And so I didn't have a lot of money. I didn't know anybody in the Utah Democratic Party. Just didn't know a lot about the process. Just kind of looked online, kind of read the bunch of the process and figured out, filed the paperwork on March 16th. And, just kind of started going to some of the county caucuses, making some speeches. And after Salt Lake County Convention, someone reached out to me. This girl's like 21 years old. She's like in a sorority at the University of Utah, and that was like my one volunteer ahead of the state convention. And I remember my first campaign meeting 4 days before the state convention, just me and this 21-year-old sorority girl, and we're talking about what the strategy is, and she's just like, I have to make it all about abortion. I need to try to highlight my opponent's conservative views. Send an email out to all the delegates the night before. Suggest that he's pro-life, but don't name him specifically. And then, that was kind of the plan. I did that. I linked that op-ed he wrote on my Facebook page and kind of increased awareness about his positions. And, I started the state convention. I had, literally didn't even have somebody at my booth for the first session of the caucus of the state convention, but I made sure I got the very first speech of the day at the Progressive Caucus and then the Women's Caucus, and just spoke out really in favor of women's reproductive rights, and talked about how my opponent wrote an op-ed where he called for an investigation in Planned Parenthood, how he described himself as conservative and pro-life, and it just did that. Was able to get endorsements from the Women's Caucus, from the Progressive Caucus, from the Stonewall Caucus, which is the LGBT one. Got the Young Democrats, Hispanic, the Asian American Pacific Islander Caucus, and the Disability Caucus. And, and by the end of the day, this girl, like this 21-year-old, she was able to help get a bunch of people on stage with me, because I was able to generate a lot of excitement based solely on how well I performed and the caucuses with my speeches. And, like when a day started, I thought it'd just be me, her, and one other girl because she gave my second speech, someone else gave my nominating speech. I thought it was just going to be three of us on stage. I ended up with probably like 40 people on the stage, a great stage presence, and I was able to get 45% of the vote to force a primary.
And that is truly like a phenomenal underdog story, because you hear about people running for their state senate and they're just like, a grocery store worker, but never for US Congress, and then actually winning their primary. So I think that's absolutely it's phenomenal. So let me ask you this. How did you fund your campaign? Because I don't believe you have a super PAC, right? So, I mean, do you raise grassroots funds? Do you knock on doors? How do you actually go about raising money?
I wanted with like 59.4% of the vote, which is a huge win. I spent probably about $6,000, and I didn't have a lot of donations. And, my opponent, he spent like 4 times that. And I had almost no money. It was just simply by really generating a lot of excitement among the Bernie Sanders crowd. And I think that guy being a self-described conservative really hurt him. But because we nailed them so hard on abortion, every interview, every article ever written about him, everyone ever talked about to him about that, asked about his stance on abortion. He just got stuck with the pro-life label that he really hurt him in the statewide Democratic primary. And so I didn't have much money. Now that I'm the nominee, I do have a bit more fundraising, but most of it's been small donations because I've really tied to kind of like this Bernie Sanders revolution type movement. I get a lot of kind of small individual donations. I haven't had a single donation from a PAC. I've had a couple of PACs endorse me. Blue America's put me on some of their joint fundraising lists, but not made a direct donation to my campaign. So that's about the most closest to like PAC money I get. It's just small donations. I've had 2 max out donations of $2,700. One of them was for my cousin. So it's been a lot of small donations. I think my average donation's probably like $35, $40. I mean, a lot of them actually aren't even in the state of Utah because I've generated a lot of national press. And hopefully that continues, because if we learned anything from Bernie Sanders' campaign, small donations in large numbers can make a huge difference.
Absolutely. And I think it also gives you this sort of legitimacy, because even though someone like you don't have experience holding public office, but people are really inclined to vote for someone like you who is just a grocery store worker, because we know that you're not beholden to corporations, all these big business interests that is making Congress basically inoperable currently. So I think that honestly is a huge benefit. And also the fact that you're kind of able to take some of the momentum from Bernie's movement and kind of use that to help you. I think it's great. So let me ask you this, though. Speaking of Bernie, has he endorsed you, and or has Hillary Clinton endorsed you? Because, I mean, what I've heard is that Utah is actually a competitive state this year since Donald Trump is doing so bad. So, I mean, since you're actually on the radar, you could potentially be another seat in the Senate for the Democrats. Have you gotten any attention from any of them?
No, not much. I mean, we've been trying to reach out to the Bernie campaign, to our revolution. Like, can you guys endorse me? Utah was Bernie Sanders' 3rd best state in the voting. He had 79% of the vote compared to Hillary Clinton's 20%. So it was not even close. But our revolution has not endorsed a single Utah candidate. Bernie Sanders hasn't endorsed any Utah candidates. And just having that endorsement, it would help my campaign, but it also Senate race being the second race on the ballot after presidency, it's a statewide race. It would help generate a lot of excitement here in the state of Utah and help probably turn out a lot more millennials, which we need not just for my race, but all the down ballot Democrats as well. State of Utah in 2014, the Democrats lost a state legislative seat by 47 votes, another one by 53 votes, another one by 195 votes. So generating enough excitement about my race can turn out more Democrats to help the down ballot candidates, whether or not they think I can win. So I think it's important that they support me, but I haven't seen that happen. But for our state being competitive in the presidential race, that much is true. There have been a couple polls where Hillary Clinton is tied with Donald Trump. There was one poll where Hillary Clinton was actually 2% above Donald Trump. I think the worst poll for her had her about down like 15 points below Trump. I think the most recent poll by Ipsos was like 44 for Trump, 39 for Clinton. But there have been a lot of polls that have showed Hillary Clinton close, and she actually just opened up a campaign office in Utah like a week ago, and they've actually been doing some mailers in the state of Utah, which pretty much never happens in Utah for Democratic presidential candidates. You never see them open an office here for general election, and you never see their campaign spending money on mailers. So the fact that they're doing that means that they do see this as being a potentially competitive state, and the presidential elections competitive in the state. Other statewide races such as Senate and gubernatorial races sometimes come into play as well. And hopefully Hillary Clinton will, if she doesn't endorse me, at least try to turn out some more voters that will, help down ballot Democrats.
Your campaign is really important. I think not just for the state of Utah, but I mean, a lot of progressives around the country, they like donating to grassroots funded candidates like yourself because, I mean, it's not just about you getting in the Senate, but we're looking down the line. Like, are we going to have a Misty Snow governor or president someday? It's about continuing the progressive revolution. So that's why I think a lot of people think that this is important. So it's frustrating to me that you haven't gotten much support from the National Democratic Party. But I think that hopefully this type of, these interviews and whatnot and all of your presence online will help to get people to put the pressure on the Democratic Party and Bernie Sanders, hopefully to get you on the Our Revolution website as well. Because, yeah, I think your campaign is very important. Now, getting to the policies. So I know that basically you are very similar to Bernie Sanders in terms of policy positions. Can you highlight like a couple of policies where you think that they're really important, or ones maybe that you'd like to fight for, particularly when you get to the Senate?
So I really, really think we need to fight for a living wage. I support raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour over the next few years with an annual adjustment for inflation thereafter. Social Security Administration says that 51% of people make $30,000 a year or less. That means the majority of workers in this country are living in poverty or near it. And so fighting for like $15 an hour minimum wage would help lift literally tens of millions of workers into a better standard of living. And when we think about who makes low wages, it's disproportionately women, it's disproportionately people of color, disproportionately members of the LGBT community. So when we talk about closing the wage gap experienced by women or people of color or members of the LGBT community, raising the minimum wage has to be a part of that. When 2/3 of our minimum wage workers are women, if we get to a serious discussion about closing the gender wage gap, can't take place unless you're talking about raising the minimum wage, because they're the ones making the low wages. So I think that is something we need to fight for. I think that's something that is necessary. And I think that's something we can win on, because polling shows consistently that majority of Americans want to raise the minimum wage because they recognize that $7.25 is not a living wage. You can't live on that in Utah or anywhere else in the country. And when you're making that low wage, you become dependent on food stamps, subsidized housing and heating. And one study said that Walmart employees, they get paid something equivalent of $6.2 billion a year in taxpayer money in subsidies. So that's a problem. And nationwide, all corporations is like $147 billion a year. That's how much the taxpayers are paying to subsidize the low wages paid by corporations like Walmart and McDonald's. And so if we made these corporations pay a living wage, that would be more the money we could save on those programs, which could be used to invest in, say, maybe making higher education tuition free, maybe investing in our infrastructure, maybe any number of other things. And the reality is we should just make corporations pay their workers a living wage, because no corporation is profitable at the talent and labors of its workers, and those workers deserve to share in the fruits of those labors and of their labor. Another policy I think we need to really fight for is paid maternity leave. United States of America is one of a very few small number of countries that does not yet offer its mothers paid maternity leave. The only other nation in the world with over 1 million people is Papua New Guinea. And, there might be a couple of smaller countries with population below 1 million, but their data is not that good in those countries. So we stand nearly alone as the richest country in the history of Earth to not offering mothers paid maternity leave. Rich countries, poor countries, small countries, large countries have all figured out how to guarantee their mothers paid maternity leave. Reality is everybody has a mother. Everybody knows somebody's given birth. So why can't we not guarantee paid maternity leave for our mothers? Other countries have already moved on to giving guaranteed paid leave for fathers as well, and we are so far behind. We're still fighting to give our mothers paid maternity leave. And as someone who's running the state of Utah, which has the nation's highest birth rate, I find that's an issue that really resonates with a lot of Utah mothers and families.
Those are the types of issues that can really galvanize the progressive base. So I think that's fantastic. Now, let me ask you this, because I think that the dynamic between your race is really interesting. So you are a progressive, so you're pretty liberal, but you're running against someone who is very conservative. He's a Tea Partier. He's Mike Lee. So can you tell us a little bit about him and why you think voters are dissatisfied with him?
So a recent poll had him June poll had him at 38% approval rating. Most recent poll had him 42% approval rating. So those are not what we would call good numbers for someone seeking re-election for an incumbent. I mean, those aren't, they're not the worst approval ratings, but they are not good approval ratings, and that's largely because a lot of Utahns, they remember his government shutdown. They remember it hurting the state. It cost our state millions of dollars, and by this government shutdown, 35,000 people who work for the federal government were out of work. They didn't know when their next paycheck was coming. They didn't know if when they'd be working again. And a lot of them were avoiding spending money because there's this great uncertainty, and that really hurt them and their families. And in addition to that, state of Utah, we have 5 national parks. We have multiple national monuments. We have lots of national forest land. And during the government shutdown, that's all shut down as well. And there's a lot of towns and communities all throughout the state of Utah that depend on tourism to those destinations. So when the government shut down, nobody's coming to their hotels. Nobody's coming to eat their restaurants or buy stuff from their gift shops. So all the people in those communities, they were hurt as well because their entire economy essentially got shut down with the government shutdown. So there's a lot of anger towards that. A lot of people really resent that. In addition to that, he's on other issues. Again, he's kind of like a pattern of not wanting to do his job. He's like join the Senate Republicans and not holding a hearing for Merrick Garland. Our poll last week by Public Policy Polling said 65% of Utahns want Merrick Garland to have a confirmation hearing. And if Mike Lee doesn't think he's qualified, well, then ask him questions. You can find out where he stands on issues. And if you don't think he's qualified, vote him down. But Utahns want you to give him a hearing because that's what your job is. And, and so it's by not giving him a hearing, it's this pattern of not doing his job. Other bills he's voted against raising the minimum wage, but despite having rhetoric about how he wants poor people to have more money in their pockets. So he talks about how his support for families, yet he blocked aid to Flint during the water crisis to prevent them from drinking water contaminated lead. So if he really cared about children, he would want to do everything he could to prevent them from children drinking contaminated water. He voted against renewing the Violence Against Women Act in 2013 because I guess he's okay with women being abused. So on issue after issue, he has not been a good champion for the working people, for women, for children, or Utah families. And I think by making the case that I'm a working class person who's going to fight for working class people and their families, I feel that it's possible to attack him from that, because he can't out working class me because he was a DC lawyer before he was a senator and his father was a politician. He doesn't have any empathy for what it's like to be poor. He's never been poor. He doesn't understand what it's like for people who are living paycheck to paycheck. And I try to make the case that I am a better representative for Utah families.
Let me ask you this, because Utah, generally speaking, they're on board with progressive issues such as living wage and whatnot. But I mean, generally speaking, they're pretty conservative. So what has the reception been to you? Because I mean, obviously your campaign is historic. You are the first transgender candidate. So I mean, how have they received you there? Has there been any backlash, or have they been generally excited?
Oh, there's been a lot of excitement. I haven't had any backlash. No one's been too negative about me being trans. I mean, it hasn't even, in the Utah press, I mean, a lot of them don't even talk about that. It's that national press talks about. The Utah press, it's more about issues. It's more, they focus more, they focus more on the fact that I work at a grocery store. That is, I guess, seem more controversial than being trans. I don't know. But, Utah has this, is very Republican, but it's not like the same kind of conservatism you see in, like, say, the South. I think it's kind of has more of a kind of a libertarian culture. I mean, polls, that same public policy poll showed that 81% of Utahns want background checks on all gun sales. 78% of Utahns want people on terror watch lists not be able to buy guns. 64% are in favor of legal medical cannabis. So there's just like a lot of issues. Utahns are actually progressive. They just have to be convinced to stop voting against their interests. And I think, the problem is Utah actually has a problem with turnout. 2014 election, we had a turnout rate of 28.8%, which I think which means we tied for third lowest in the nation. Only Texas was lower. So that's something that's really disappointing. And so I think it's really an issue of turning out voters instead of staying home. And I think one of the issues that really contributed to a lot of dissatisfaction people actually want to turn out is that Utah Democratic Party for far too long has had this idea that they have to nominate conservative Democrats to be their nominees. These straight white Mormon men who are almost indistinguishable from the Republicans. I mean, I don't know if you remember Jim Matheson, but he was in the Congress for like 14 years in House of Representatives, and he was a what they call a blue dog Democrat who was pro-war, anti-environment, and anti-gay. And a lot of Democrats actually hated him, but he was able to get reelected by painting himself as like a Republican. So it was, but that was a long time ago now. I think Utah, the demographics have shifted a lot more. It's a very young state. It's become a lot less white, a lot less LDS, and a lot of people, they're when it comes to issues, they're fairly progressive. They just have to, realize that it's that Republicans have not served their interests, have not championed the issues they care about. Utah also being the youngest state in the nation, we have probably more millennials per capita than any other. And I tried to make the case that at 31 years old, if I was elected to U.S. Senate, I would be the first millennial elected to U.S. Senate. And I tried to make the case that I'd be our voice I try to make the case to millennials that I'd be our voice for Congress. I'm a voice for our generation, and they should come out and vote for me. They should support me.
That's really encouraging, actually, to hear that you can focus on the policy substance and really get people to support you that way. Because I don't know if you saw the coverage that we've done of you before, but I was actually pretty critical of MSNBC when they had you on, because all that they could focus on.
Yeah, that video about me and Zephyr.
Right. Yeah, and I was frustrated because you had all these policy positions that are exciting. I mean, it's very rare that a Berniecrat, well, I mean, I don't know if it's necessarily rare, but we've had some bad losses lately. I mean, we had Alan Grayson, Tim Konova. They lost their primaries against an establishment Democrat, and you won. So, I mean, all these policy positions that you have are really exciting, yet they didn't focus on that in the interview. So I was very critical of that.
30-year-old transgender woman, transgender nominee, transgender woman. You are transgender woman. You are a cashier, which may make it more challenging than actually being a transgender woman, that you don't have a political background. Comment on you being a transgender woman.
Yeah, I think Tim Canova losing was sad. And Al Grayson, he was probably one of the most progressive people in the House of Representatives, but like I said, he lost that race not because of the policy position, but he was actually leading the polls right up until some of the scandals came out about his hedge fund or how he was abusive towards his ex-wife, and that's what hurt his candidacy, which is unfortunate. But that's why you have to, be careful about what you do in your personal life too when you're running for office. But we have won some other progressives. Russ Feingold won his primary, and hopefully he'll get returned to the Senate because he was the one senator who voted against the Patriot Act in 2001, 2002 when they put that. It was a 99-1. He was that one vote. So having like someone who actually cares about our civil rights return to the Senate would be great. Some other like progressives have won in other races throughout the country. I think so. We just need to keep raising the issue about progressives, fighting for these issues. Even if you don't think you can win, just by talking about issues such as $15 hour minimum wage, paid maternity leave, single-payer health care, and other issues, just by talking about them, we're raising awareness about those issues, which creates political will for those issues. So it's important to advocate for those issues. It's important to support candidates who are talking about those issues, because that's how you change the dialogue.
And I think that your campaign is particularly important, especially after these losses, because I've heard from a lot of people right now, they just feel so disappointed and disheartened, and they feel like they can never have any success, at the ballot box. But I think that yours is kind of that shining ray of hope where we can look at you and see, okay, there is a progressive Democrat that was able to win in Utah. So I love it. So we're all rooting for you. Can you tell us where we could find out more information about you and your policies and how we can actually help support your campaign?
So for those who'd like to find out more about my campaign, I recommend going to my website at mistyksnow.com, MISTYKSNOW. And on my website, if you want to help out, there is a link to my Act Blue page, which if you'd like to make a donation. And, if I was elected to U.S. Senate, I'd be one of 100 senators. If everybody donated, say, $100 or whatever they could, I would be able to compete with Mike Lee financially. He's had 6 years to build up a campaign fund. I've had 4 months. I need those donations. I appreciate those donations. If you happen to live in Utah and can volunteer for me, that's also great. And, if nothing else, you can also subscribe to the mailing list. At the bottom of my website, there's links to my Twitter, my Instagram, my Facebook page. If you do any of those and you like the stuff I'm posting, by all means, share it with your other on your social media accounts. Get the word out, help spread the word about me, because that always increases my audience. And the larger my audience, the more anytime we put out an email for fundraising or put a post, help increases the potential to generate more donations. And again, if you know anyone who can donate, again, we need those donations. We appreciate those donations. That's Bernie Sanders showed us that the power of small donation in large numbers. You guys can do that too. And I need those donations. And even for whatever reason you think, oh, it's Utah, I don't have a chance. Well, it's important to support me because I'm giving voice to these issues. And by supporting me, you're allowing me to increase my audience and reach more people by talking about these issues.
There you guys have it. Hopefully you guys enjoyed that. Misty Snow is a fantastic candidate, and hopefully she can defeat Mike Lee.
Thank you for having me on your show.